The following Truth Barista podcast is a High Beam Ministry production.
Vows and oaths are part of every community of people. In the marriage vow, husband and wife agree to observe specific behaviors. In a courtroom, the witnesses swear an oath that the words they speak are true. God told the children of Israel that they were bound by their vows and oaths.
Welcome to the Erzatz Coffee Shop. This is Jay, your Truth Barista, and I'm serving up a steamy cup of God's truth for the average Joe. You can catch me and this podcast on my websites, truthbarista.com, all one word, truthbarista.com, and highbeamministry.com. That's HIGHBEAM ministry.com, as in car high beam. We're shining the light of God's truth on the road ahead.
Truth Barista, we're back in the Anointed booth. Wow, my favorite place to be
Mine too.
Anywhere in the earth. I want to be here in the Anointed booth. Yeah, I've got a question because it's really bugged me, and that is, sometimes people tell you things like, I'm going to do this for you, and I'm going to promise this and promise that, and it's kind of like making an oath, and then they don't fulfill it. I just get steamed on that. So, what does Jesus say about oaths? I mean, are we supposed to be more attentive to things we say we promise to?
Okay, well, I have a couple questions for you first. Number one, you obviously read ahead into this Matthew section that we've been, pulling apart regarding Jesus and the Torah, right?
Well, I've been looking at oaths because I'm concerned about people not fulfilling them.
Okay, and my second question to you, the delivery guy burned you again, didn't he?
Yes, he did. He didn't show up. When he did show up, he didn't bring me what I ordered, so yeah.
So, okay, that's a reasonable question right there. So anyway, this is such a fascinating topic because when you look at Matthew 5 through 7, the first thing that Jesus seems to do in this section, well, he does, is he sinks the foundation of his word, his Torah, and he says, this is how my disciples will live. Now, you're not going to live according to the letter of the law. You're going to live according to the spirit of the law. And if you take all of Jesus' teachings together, you realize that the Holy Spirit, his living word, his Torah, is going to live in us, and he's going to guide us in our walk. So people say, well, I don't need the Torah. I don't need the law. I can just love people because that's what it says, love God. Right, love people. Okay, so you look at, and then I look at the people and say, "How do you do that?" Well, you just love them.
Yeah. Well, you sound like an old hippie man coming out of hibernation.
Oh no, I bypassed those years, thankfully.
I have another question, and it has to do with: can you explain what it means that you're not having to walk the law as the law predicts, but you're going to walk the law in the Spirit? What's the difference?
Okay, it's just what you and I talked about the last couple of weeks. The Torah says, don't murder. Jesus, according to the Spirit, says, I'll tell you what, if you deal with the heart that hates somebody, you're not going to move toward the murder action. The Torah says, don't commit adultery. But Jesus makes it tougher, and he goes, you got to deal with the heart of lust because it'll end in an action of lust. And then he was talking about divorce, and that has to do with the whole adultery thing. Okay. Well, that's kind of related to the whole previous one on adultery. If you don't watch your heart, you could break your marriage vows. And once those are broken, divorce is allowed for our hard hearts. But really the spirit behind it, if you look at all of God's counsel, is the encouragement to reconcile if you can. Okay, so Jesus was saying, yeah, divorce is allowed, but only for the proper reasons. Otherwise, it's an illegitimate and illegal, if you want to put it that way, divorce. On one hand, Jesus is enforcing the Torah, and in conjunction with that, he's making sure that it's done properly. That's the key to this whole section. And so he moves into this thing that you talked about, taking oaths and making vows. And some people just breeze through this and go, yeah, so what? And I'm going, it's a big deal. It's about keeping your word.
Well, it has to do with relationships, isn't it? Like an oath and a vow is to people or to God or to somebody other than yourself, right? And I suppose you could keep an oath to yourself. I'm going to lose 20 pounds over the next 10 days. But the point is, well, my question is to this, did they not have anything written? Like today, we would say an oath would be a contract, right? And we would have something signed and notarized and all of that to make it legal. So how did they make things legal? Why couldn't I dispute with you, Truth Barista, if I made an oath to you? I mean, how do you know that there was even an oath made? Because it's all oral.
Well, that's true. I mean, a man's word is his bond. And while we have certain procedures to guarantee an oath or a promise, such as a contract, they had the same thing back then. It was their word. You could write a scroll. You could seal it with a clay seal or a wax seal with a ring kind of a thing. Or they used to carry a seal around the neck so that when you pressed it into clay, that stone seal would make an imprint, and that would be signing your contract. So, yeah, the same thing, the same principle is today as it was back then, just some of the forms are different.
Okay.
But really what Jesus talks about in this section is about keeping your word and how people would use certain formulas and certain ways of making an oath or a vow that would give them an out in case it was just too inconvenient. Okay. It's kind of like today. It's like I make a promise to make all the payments on my car, but there's a law out there that says if I don't make my payments, they can come and repossess my car. So it's easier just to fall back on that than it is to actually go through the pain of paying off my car. So what I'm looking at is, again, what Jesus says. So let's get into this. This is Matthew chapter 5, and let's start at verse 33, okay?
Okay.
Here it is. Jesus says, again, as he's talking about all of these, you've heard it from the Torah. So he says, he's dipping back into the Torah again. Again, you have heard it, that it was said of those of old, you shall not swear falsely, sir. There's the key. You shall not swear falsely, but shall perform your oaths to the Lord. Verse 34. But I say to you, do not swear at all, neither by heaven, for it's God's throne, nor by earth, for it's his footstool, nor by Jerusalem, for it's the city of the great king. Nor shall you swear by your head, because you cannot make one hair white or black. But let your yes be yes, and your no, no. For whatever is more than these is from the evil one. Now, before we get going, what do you glean from that?
Wow. Well, I think that I would say there's a reality of honesty here, because an oath is something that is more formal. I don't know. It just seems to me it's a little confusing because it gets to the very end and it says anything more than a yes or a no is evil. And I'm going, what? I mean, there's nothing wrong with a contract, is there? There's nothing wrong with an oath, but the way that it's stated here, it sounds like that's wrong.
Yes. You've actually hit on it. So let me unpack it a little bit more and give a little more substance to this here. There's actually 3 parts in this particular thing that Jesus is talking about. The Torah command, which was given at Sinai, and then verses 34 through 36, where he talks about oath making and why he tells us not to swear oaths, etc. And then finally, he hits his point in verse 37. So let's start with the first one, verse 33, okay? According to Leviticus 19:12, Numbers 30, verse 2, and Deuteronomy 23:21, people were allowed to make vows and oaths, but they had to do it within very strict parameters. Why? Because according to God, and this would scare the pants off people if they got the seriousness of this, okay? To God, vows and oaths are very serious things. So much so that there is a special addition to the Yom Kippur Day of Atonement service that the rabbis have added to forgive and erase all unfulfilled vows and oaths from the year before, just to make sure that we didn't leave anything hanging. In other words, at this particular part of the service, and no, God did not command that, what they call the covering of the vows. So the rabbis added this particular nullification of unmet vows and oaths so that we wouldn't carry that over into the next year. Why? Because unfulfilled vows and oaths are regarded as a sin. It's a sin to God when we have vowed or made an oath to God. And there's a difference between those two. We'll talk about that someday. But also to our fellow person, right? So Yeshua's teaching here, Jesus' teaching here, is not about making an oath to God. It's about how his disciples are to use oaths with other people.
Okay. Well, kind of. I mean, an oath is something you are making a promise to. If I say to you, Truth Barista, I promise to make fresh coffee every morning, that is an oath, a promise to you, and I need to keep that vow or that oath, right?
And I would welcome that. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
Does it include a kolache?
No. That costs us money.
Well, think of it in this way. An oath is a promise. A vow is also a promise, but under the old covenant, a vow is something that you give to God. So I would vow a particular sheep to God as a thank offering. So now that sheep belongs to God.
Correct.
I can't use that sheep for my purposes. I can't shear it for my purposes. I can't eat it for my purposes. It is set aside and it belongs to God. If you happen to use it, now you not only have to pay God back for what you avowed, but you actually have to add a restitution beyond that. This is why in Ecclesiastes it says, don't be hasty to make a vow before God, because you don't want to have to sit there and go, when the guy who comes to your house to collect on that vow, that animal you vowed, or that thing you vowed to God. In other words, he says, you can't stand there and go, I'm sorry, guys, it was just a mistake. No, you vowed it. It goes to God. That goes back now to the oath, because the oath is like what you said. It's a promise to do something, not a promise to, like a vow, to give something. I hope that makes a little more sense.
It does. So let me just pause here for just a moment and ask more of a relevant question to today.
Okay.
A lot of Christians will say, well, I never vowed to pay 10% or a tithe of my income. I don't see that necessarily, they would say, in the New Testament. So we're taking an Old Testament principle where a tithe would go to the storehouse or the temple. I'm not sure that I see that in the New Testament. Therefore, I'm not breaking any vow or any oath that I've made to God by not paying my tithe. Okay, that's the first scenario, Truth Barista. The second scenario is a little like it, but I've heard Christians say, well, I can't pay a real tithe of 10%, but I can give like 3%. So in either one of those situations, is there sin involved?
The letter of the Torah says to pay a tithe, all right? Actually, if you look at tithes, and we should talk about this sometime too, the tithe was more than just 10%. You tithed to the temple. You also kept a tithe, the Levites who lived in your town. And in the 7-year cycle, every 3 years, you took that tithe that would go to the Levites and you would give it to the poor in your town. So actually, it's not a tithe. If you were to follow the letter of the Torah, it's a double tithe every year. Which is kind of tough because some of us just have a problem trying to do a single tithe, right?
Right. Well, I'm just curious because it ties into the vow and the oath.
Exactly.
Okay.
But let me cut you short here, because a tithe is not a vow or an oath. A tithe is a command. So Jesus would say, since I'm affirming the Torah, I'm affirming the command to tithe. And if you really want to get strict about it, it's a double tithe. Okay. But we'll get into that some other day.
Well, I love that. I love that because that makes a lot of sense. It's not a vow or an oath we've made. It is a command. Now, that's a clarification. That's a good one, Truth Barista.
Now, and here's another thing is Christians say, well, Jesus didn't talk about it, so therefore it doesn't apply. Well, it falls into that rabbinic category. If it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? So if people are tithing properly, then it doesn't need to be addressed. However, Jesus did address tithing. Mm-hmm. He said, you Pharisees are following the letter of the law by tithing even the smallest of seeds, but you're ignoring the greater aspects of the Torah, which is love and justice and mercy. He says, you should have done these tithing. There he affirms it. You should have done the big things without forsaking the tithing.
Correct.
So Jesus affirms the tithe. And Paul even says it too. He modifies it. He kind of takes a rabbinic ruling and he says on the tithe, if you don't have it, then allow the Holy Spirit to show you what to give.
Okay.
And so I tell people, if you're following the spirit of the law of the Torah is to give to God and to other people, because that's what you're doing in the tithe. I think the Torah sets the target mark as 10%. Okay, go for that.
Correct.
I know some people who give 90% of their income away and live on 10%.
Wow. They must have a pretty doggone big income.
Yes, they do.
Because that 10%'s got to cover a lot.
Exactly. Or they live very modestly.
Well, either way, it's got to be a lot. I didn't mean to take you on a rabbit trail there, Truth Barista, but I do think it's important when we talk about oaths and vows and then commandments. I think there's a real interesting distinction between the three, and as you cleared it up today, that a tithe is a commandment.
Right. And if you take an oath or a vow, that does fall under commands as well, because the Torah says if you're going to vow something, fulfill your vow. If you're going to make an oath, fulfill your oath. So in a sense, yeah, they are voluntary, but once they are made voluntarily, you are bound to those things to follow them through.
Well, Truth Barista, we're bound to take a break somewhere in this discussion of ours because I think we need more coffee. And
Didn't you just make that oath that you were going to make me fresh coffee every day?
I did. I got to go fulfill it.
We are presenting God's truth for our day. You're listening to The Truth Barista, a production of highbeamministry.com.
Hi, this is Jay Christensen with High Beam Ministry. I want to thank you for listening to the Truth Barista podcast today, and I want to personally invite you to visit highbeamministry.com, highbeamministry.com, all one word, highbeamministry.com. You will find all sorts of resources for your individual study, for your small group study, for your church, for your, if you need a message for a congregational meeting sometime. We've got all sorts of resources. We've got the articles that you can read that are fresh on a weekly basis. We have the Truth Barista podcast that comes up on a weekly basis. I have a Bible study I'm developing called Cruising Through the Bible, which will give you a synopsis of a Bible chapter and help walk you through it to help teach you on a very basic level what it's about. Soon we will be developing video classes that you can access online of entire series of Bible topics and Bible books. Just visit the website, highbeamministry.com. If you're interested in attending an online class with us, just simply email us at highbeamministry@gmail.com. Once again, highbeamministry@gmail.com. All one word, highbeamministry@gmail.com. Love to hear from you.
I am Maurice. I am the host here at the Ersatz Coffee Shop. I love listening to the Truth Barista. What I love more than that is a good cup of coffee. And even beyond that, I love High Beam Ministry. If you go there, you will be blessed as I am with wonderful resources. You will find articles. You'll find the Truth Barista podcast. You will find Bible studies like Cruising Through the Bible. You will be blessed and highly favored. Go to highbeamministry.com.
Okay, Truth Barista, I'm sorry I got you off track here a little bit, so let's come back to oaths and vows as we're talking about in Matthew 5:33 and following.
Okay, so once again, in verse 33, Jesus says, "Again, you have heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not swear falsely," which is true, "but shall perform your oaths to the Lord." Okay, but I say to you, do not swear at all. This is verse 34. "Neither by heaven, for it's God's throne, nor by earth, for it's his footstool, nor by Jerusalem, for it's the city of the great king, nor shall you swear by your head, because you cannot make one hair black or white." Jesus is not talking about whether you make oaths or not. It's how you do it. That's the point. So if the Torah allows oath making, why does Jesus tell us not to swear an oath? Again, this is not about making an oath to God. The context of Matthew 5 that you and I are studying is how we are to live and love other people. So, for example, watch your anger, because it can lead to outward acts of even murder. Guard your heart's desire, because it can lead to adultery and broken marriage vows. See, it's interesting because these things that begin with the heart ultimately end in actions that affect other people, hurting them, killing them, committing adultery, betraying wedding vows. So really, if you look at the totality, Jesus is teaching his disciples, this is how you love other people, using the Torah as your guideline, and the Holy Spirit guiding your heart.
Well, and it comes back, speaking of divorce, it comes back to this whole idea of making a vow that you need to keep. You need to keep that vow to the person you're vowing it to in your marital vows that you take, right? I mean, and we as a society have disrespected all of that. And I think the ramifications of divorce comes through the dysfunction in families, blended families that aren't always as healthy as we would like them to be.
One thing that's kind of going through my head now is when we lose our respect and honor of God, we take our vows lightly.
Yes, exactly.
Because if we really, really had a vision of God in his majesty and his authority and his justice, when we take a vow, we would be much more committed to follow through with that vow or oath, regardless of our feelings. It's not our feelings that guide us. It's our commitment to the Lord.
Well, you are a pastor, Truth Barista, or have been,
Yep.
and you've done weddings. Now, so do you spend a great deal of time on talking to the couple about this vow so that what you just said becomes more important focus of the marriage ceremony than just saying, well, you know, we're going to make some vows and we're going to have some nice little music and we're going to say a nice homily and then we're done. Do you focus specifically that this vow is really important?
In some cases, I do. In some cases, as I've gone through pastoral counseling, there are couples that I told them, you shouldn't get married because you're not prepared to make this vow.
Whoa.
You have deep problems in your relationship, and until those problems are resolved, holding to this vow will be very difficult.
Good for you.
And it's a tough thing to do for people because they think, churches and pastors are just, wedding factories. Type of a thing. And it's
Las
like, no,
Vegas.
Yeah. You're making a vow before Almighty God. And I've told couples, God backs up that vow and he will not leave the vow breaker or the oath breaker unpunished. See, once again, you're talking covenants. Covenants have a reward for obedience and a punishment or discipline for disobedience. For the wedding, you've given your vow, you've given your oath to your spouse. If you break that wedding vow, those wedding oaths, you know what your discipline is, your punishment is? Divorce. And there are very few people I know out there who have gone through the divorce and said, wow, that's the biggest blessing I've ever had in my life. And they're going, no, it's, and even if the couple is happy to get divorced, what about the children?
Right.
What about the parents? What about the brothers and sisters and everybody around them?
Yeah.
You can't tell me that a divorce is a blessing to all those around them.
Very uncomfortable and awkward, and it's a lifetime. Rarely do divorced people ever become friends and make life easy for each other. It's very rare that ever happens.
I've only known one couple that's done that, and they are phenomenal. And I can tell you they've done it because of Jesus.
Yeah.
That's the only way.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's get back into this. 33, Jesus says, okay, this is what you've heard, 34 through 36. So if the Torah allows oath making, so why does Jesus tell us not to swear an oath? Okay, the real question is this. What are our motives for swearing an oath? An oath is allowed, but Jesus says, but don't do it this way. Well, why are they doing it this way, according to his examples? Because they have an underlying motive. Yeah, I see a puzzled look on your face.
Well,
so
I
follow
do.
me.
Wow, okay.
Okay, so why would somebody use an oath with another person? It's to assure the other person that we will fulfill our promise. See, if our word is weak, then we need to strengthen it. So we would say, with God as my witness, I will do this and such. Okay. If your word was your bond, all you'd have to say is, I'm going to do this, and it'll be done. But when our word is weak, we'll say, well, God will back me up. Well, that gets really scary because now if I break my oath, who have I invoked into this whole process?
Yeah.
God,
yeah.
And so now God is going to deal with the process. Now a broken oath is a real sin because I pulled God into the situation. Mm-hmm. Now, in a sense, it's also a sin because breaking my oath to another person is not loving them. It's hurting them. That's a sin. Okay, so rather than pull God into the situation, they pull in things that are close to God, but not God exactly. Okay, so here you go. Don't swear by heaven. I swear by heaven I'm going to do this. And Jesus is going, no, because that's God's throne.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you have no right to it in that respect, right?
Well, you're saying I'm invoking the closest thing to God without invoking God himself. And Jesus goes, no, heaven is God's throne.
Got it.
Okay, well, I swear by the earth. No, that's God's footstool.
He owns that too.
I swear by Jerusalem's existence that I will do it. No, because that's God's city. Oh, I swear by my head. Trying to get away from God entirely. No, because you really can't change things on your head. In other words, why are people doing this? Because they're hedging their bet. There may be a circumstance where I have to break my oath. So if I swear by God, now I'm under God's punishment. But if I swear by heaven, it invokes the image that I'm swearing by God. But in reality, I'm not really. Do you see it?
I do.
It's a motive of giving yourself an out.
And that's evil. That's how he ends up.
And that is evil. Okay. So in other words, if fulfilling our promise is a given and no doubt at all, then why do we need to tag our promise with an oath? I swear to God, Larry, I'm going to pay you back $5. Well, if I'm going to pay you back $5, why do I tag it with God? It's actually kind of blasphemy because you're inviting God to back up your word, which is good to begin with. So it's unnecessary.
Well, it should be. It should be good by itself, but because it may not be, you're giving somebody the assurance of actually having it backed up by God, as how I see it anyway.
That's what it is. So the problem with all this is when an oath becomes an escape clause. Jesus is not talking about genuine oath. He's talking about worthless oaths. And what makes an oath worthless or a promise worthless? When it's given with no intent to honor our word or provide us a way out of honoring our word. That is an evasive oath. It is bearing false witness because I'm going to do this. Well, if you don't do this, you've borne false witness. Now you've really broken one of the 10.
I was just going to say, is there more to all of this that we need to unpack? Because if there is a lot more, we're going to have to wait until we come back into this anointed booth next week.
Well, no, I can actually kind of sum this up here.
Okay.
Because Jesus shows us that close enough is not allowed. You either have your promise and your fulfillment of that promise, or don't make the promise at all. That's the point of verse 37. The point of the passage is integrity. Now, this is from the University Press, their Bible commentary. The point of the passage is integrity. Jesus observes that since God witnesses every word we say anyway, we should be able to tell the truth without having to call God to witness by a formal oath, unquote. So really amazing, Larry, as Jesus' disciples, we are to always say what we mean and mean what we say. Anything beyond that, spin or sidestepping, reveals an evil motive. And by the way, what does that say about politics, huh? Okay, so back to verse 33. If we're commanded to keep our word to God, we must keep our word to other people. We can't treat God one way and our neighbor another. Why? Because we're made in God's image. And in a very strong sense, abusing God's image is abusing God. The nature of the one to whom we swear does not affect our obligation to fulfill our word. Once spoken, we are bound to our word and prohibited from breaking it with the same regard as if we had sworn to God himself.
That's so good, Truth Barista. I can't tell you how many times people have said to me, I do not want to deal with Christian business people because they don't keep their word. And I think it's just a great reminder that all of what God tells us to do is have character and integrity, not only with Him, which starts with Him, but not only with Him, but with everybody else. And that keeps it simple and honest and on the front burner rather than trying to be something that's hidden or, something with wrong motives that has an agenda. So this has been so good.
And think of this. What a remarkable world if everybody kept their word. But even if just Christians kept their word.
Yeah.
Yes, yes, no, No, that simple. I mean, what a witness for the world. It's like these are people of their word because they are people of the word.
Oh, so good. Where are we going next week?
Okay, next week, I want to look at this eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth thing, because that's the next section of verse 38. Read ahead on that one. It's 38 through 41. Because a lot of people think, oh, wow, that means if somebody hits me, I get to smack them back.
Yeah.
And there's the self-defense thing, that we've seen in recent news with Carl Rittenhouse. I mean, what about self-defense?
Yeah, I think it's great. It's going to be exciting.
Let's play with that as we go.
All right. See ya.
Jesus told us he would return. When he returns, he would put all things under his feet, and he would set up his kingdom from Jerusalem. This is the future for our world, and our task prior to his return is to prepare people for it.
This is Jay, your Truth Barista. Thanks for listening to the Truth Barista podcast. The best way to find out when a new podcast drops is through RSS feed. Go to our website, look for the RSS button, press it, and then enter your email. You'll be notified when a new podcast drops. Thanks for listening.